Welcome to the Executive Function for All podcast, helping people improve their executive function skills and reach their goals. Brought to you by Untapped Learning. Today we welcome Dr. Peg Dawson, co-author of Smart But Scattered. Dr. Dawson is a pioneer in the field of executive function. She brings decades of wisdom, offers practical advice, and shares her insights on how developing executive function skills is different compared to earlier generations. She also gives her thoughts on how we can help kids build resilience through safe failures. Every time I hear Dr. Dawson speak, I learn so much, and I'm excited to share this episode with you. Peg, I can't tell you how excited I am to talk to you again. As you know, you're someone I've always looked up to, so thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. And you've certainly, our conversation already has raised some interesting questions that I'd love to be able to talk about. So let's go for it.
Yes. So what started this was we both read the article. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about executive function coaching. And that's one of the first times I've really seen it in a big publication. And like most comment sections, when you scroll down after the article, I thought the article did a good job. When you go scroll down to the comment section, there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of negativity around this concept of executive function coaching from, what we can assume are older adults. So right off the bat, where do you think that comes from?
Well, you have to start with who is attracted to writing comments.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. And then the other thing is, I think our default is, why can't they be like we were, perfect in every way? And that song comes back to me all the time. We assume that whatever our beliefs are or the way we were raised was the right way to do it. And so anything that's new or different out there, I think, leads people to criticize. And, now that I think about it, I think one of the central tensions in our society is this whole idea of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps or creating a community of support. And a lot of those people should be able to just do it on their own, I think, comes out. And especially, to be honest, readers of the Wall Street Journal would be more likely to have that reaction probably than the population at large.
No, I think that's fair. And I'm always battling this mentality of everybody makes it by themselves. Because I can't tell you how many defensive teenagers who truly believe that. And I'm of the belief where the most successful people I know have a lot of people who go out of their way for them. And so there's a huge mental shift that I know I'm constantly battling, but I think you're right about the comment section. I think a certain type of person who has time to really read that and dive into a lot of comments may not be the right people. But it does bring up a good point. So how was growing up in the 50s and 60s? A lot of people cite that time as people were ready to be adults at 18. They were really developing these executive function skills. How is that different from now?
I grew up in the 50s and 60s, so I'm an expert on this. Though I would question whether any of us were ready to be adults, by the age of 18, for sure. But I do have some thoughts about what was different. Obviously, the touch points for me are my own childhood, but as I read other people's descriptions of what it was like to grow up in the 50s and 60s, my childhood was not all that different. And so I think there are a number of things that were different about that era than today. For one thing, there were larger families in those days. I had 3 brothers. We were all pretty close in age. And my father was an oceanographer. He was out to sea 6 months out of every year, leaving my mom at home as the single parent of 4 rambunctious kids. She couldn't control everything. And there were difficult times too. My brothers were 11 months apart in age, and my memories of their childhood with them squabbling throughout an entire childhood. But when you have larger families, first of all, parents can't do everything for their kids the way they can today. And second of all, you have to learn to live with your brothers and sisters. And there's a lot of natural learning that goes on that particularly affects executive skill development. So that's one thing. There was also more downtime in those days, less readily available entertainment. We really had to entertain ourselves. We had to use our imagination. We were more likely to go out and play with friends because that was our option in those days. And when we were playing with friends, it was unstructured. It was, imaginary play. I remember friends of ours had a shed out in the back of their yard that was sort of falling apart, but it became a pioneer home and we were playing pioneers. So that kind of thing. And also when there's less structured time, there's more opportunity for boredom. And there's a lot of research that suggests that we benefit from boredom. We figure out how to get on board. We become more flexible. So executive skills like metacognition and flexibility develop with that. We had more freedom to explore our own neighborhood and community, which, in today's age, people are fearful of letting kids do this. My son sent me a really nice graphic a few years ago, which showed four generations of a family in the UK and how much freedom they had. I mean, I'll just refer to it here. The great grandfather, whose name was George, he was 8 years old in 1919. He was allowed to walk 6 miles to go fishing. His son, Jack, who was 8 in 1950, so that would be sort. I was born in 1949, so that's somewhat comparable. This sounds like my childhood. He was able to walk 1 mile to be on his own in the woods. And that's what I remember, just going off to the woods down the street from my house and spending a couple hours there by myself in the afternoon. So that was 1950. His daughter, who was 8 in 1979, she was allowed to walk to the swimming pool alone, half a mile away. And her son, who's 8 now, only allowed to walk on his own to the end of the street, 300 yards. So think how learning is constricted when you're confined to 300 yards as opposed to 6 miles. A couple of other things. I think, and I may be wrong about this, I think there was a greater expectations that kids would do chores and help out around the house in the 50s and 60s. I mean, just throughout my clinical career, which spanned like 40 years, the first stages of interviewing parents, I would say to them things like, so what kind of chores does your child have to do? And by the end, I was saying, are there any chores your child has to do? Because that's how it changed. And more informal caregivers. I mean, there was a natural social networking. Other adults in the neighborhood kept an eye on you. I mean, that really was true. We sort of looked out for each other in a way that, everybody, and that happened more because there were more stay-at-home moms in those days. So that was sort of built in. There were probably more multi-generational families, although that may be changing, with grandparents sort of keeping an eye on things as well. On the other hand, I mean, just not to paint too rosy a picture, there was certainly less understanding of and tolerance for learning differences. So I think kids with learning challenges were worse off. And my older brother, who, as an adult, I diagnosed him with ADHD, but he was in fifth grade, he was thrown in a special ed class because of his behavior problems. It was total misplacement for him. There were kids with intellectual deficits in there. This was a guy who got 700 on his SATs. That was not the right place for him. And luckily, his teacher recognized it and put him back in regular classes. But it felt like those were the two choices: disrupt the regular class or be put into a special class. Whereas now we do much more in terms of helping those kids. Also, just looking at school again, more emphasis on rote learning, less opportunity for experiential learning. I think learning is richer today. I think teachers are better at thinking about how to engage kids, not all, of course, but how to engage kids in the learning process. And also, and this is a plus minus, less parental involvement in their kids' schooling. I mean, it was rare for a parent to intervene in what was going on at school. And now parents intervene all the time.
That was beautifully laid out. You knocked out all my questions in that one. So thank you. Just out of curiosity, where did you fall in the siblings? Were you oldest, youngest? I guess you said you have an older brother. So
Yeah, no, one older brother, two younger brothers. Yeah, so I was the second in line. My mother called me the bossy one, so I was bossing my siblings around. Yeah.
there's no way. There's no way. But I mean, because what you're referring to is, older generations. I'm sure you were responsible for a lot of chores around the house, helping out with cooking and doing, laundry and just basic stuff that it sounds like all the kids had to chip in. I think you're right. I don't see many kids that, at least in our sphere, who do that many chores. Maybe it's basics like take the trash out once per week, but I just don't see that.
Again, that's been my impression as well. In fact, when I would say to a parent, are there any chores your child has? I can remember, I mean, parents in upper middle class families answering honestly and somewhat apologetically saying, you know what? I work a really intense professional job, 40 to 50 hours a week. When I get home from work, I do not want to fight with my kids. So I find it easier to take out the trash, load the dishwasher. I've had parents of teenagers cleaning their kids' bedrooms because they didn't want to fight with them, but they also didn't like messy bedrooms. So
And also you hit on something super important too, grades. Like I grew up in the 80s and 90s where when my report card came home, I would try to run to the mailbox and hide the thing real quick. When we used to get report cards mailed home, and now we get minute to minute updates on grades. And I think that's a huge piece of this too, is it's almost parents viewed as a real-time view of their parenting. It's like, oh, my kid just got a 6 out of 10 on a vocabulary test. I must be doing something wrong. And we
right.
jump in right away and not let them figure it out.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. They do have up-to-minute access to how their kids are doing. And in addition, I mean, I'm not on Facebook. Oh, well, I have a Facebook page, but I barely use it. But there are a lot of parents out there who are on Facebook and they're comparing themselves or they're hearing about how their friends' kids are doing. And then they think my kid has to be doing that well too, which is, I mean, that's just horrible pressure on kids. So there's more comparison going on the part of parents. And you're right, they're taking it personally, but they also want their kid to be doing better than their next door neighbor's kid.
There's so many pieces to it, but that's really the core that I see so often is I didn't figure things out until my 30s, like mid 30s, right? And just with having ADHD, it just took me slower. But then all these challenges you go to turn into a gift. But it's really hard to communicate that to a parent, especially when you see social media posts about how this kid's going to Harvard and this kid just won the state championship swim meet and all these things. And so that's actually the battle that I do on a daily basis is this constant comparison and not letting these kids develop over time.
Yeah, and that makes me really sad. And my message to parents all the time, and I've had parents in tears when I say this, you know what, most of these kids turn out fine. And that's, I mean, we just revised Smart But Scattered, and I quoted a mom in it who said, you know, I've heard you say that at a couple of sessions, and every time it brings tears to my eyes because my kid is doing okay. And I just keep having to remind myself of that. I think in one of our emails, I also talked about reading the book Never Enough, where the author really looked at kids in the highest achieving schools in the United States and had thousands of conversations with these kids. And the one that really stood out for me was this kid saying to her, the author, interviewing her, the only conversations I have with my parents are about how did you do on that last test or what grade did you get? That is so, what does that communicate? That communicates that you are what you achieve as opposed to you are who you are. And that's just sad.
Thank you for saying that. And that's a great book. I read it after you recommended it, and it shined a lot of light on a lot of things I was experiencing, but I didn't really think about. It was a phenomenal read. So I guess the question here is, we know kids aren't developing these skills right now, these executive function skills to be independent. The amount of students we see who go from the highly structured high school life, 6 to 7 periods a day planned out for them, extracurriculars planned out, and then they go home and someone made their bed, right? To going to college and they just get rocked because they don't have these skills or they start to adult. We're just not seeing these skills develop. How can we start to turn that around?
Yeah, so first of all, I think we need to give kids more opportunities to make choices, decisions about how they spend their time or what their goals are, making their lives less structured because you're right, that's part of it. They're going from highly structured where every minute of their life is sort of managed to college where, I mean, they can continue that busy life if they want to, but no one's making them do that and they don't even know how to make those choices. So I think, you know, that's one thing. I think the whole idea of gradually ceding control over a child, which is a really, I mean, that's a hard concept for parents to grasp. Someone just a couple months ago, one of my workshops recommended a book which really addresses that issue. Let me just throw it out. It's got the weirdest title. I wish he hadn't chosen that title. It's called Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. But the author describes what he calls planned emancipation. And it's taking the various domains of a kid's life and gradually giving them control over that. I mean, he actually has it in his what's wonderful. I mean, it's the book I would have wanted when my kids were that age, because he says, okay, start with the bedroom. You can give them control over the bedroom. Choice of music you listen to being the second one. I mean, he goes, and the last one being using judgment and deciding when to come home at night. But he has guidelines for each of those. He says, you're not totally ceding control. You're saying, here are the ground rules. You can take care of your own bedroom as long as it's not attracting rodents, you know, something like that. He's got some good humor about that. You can choose what you want to wear, but I'm going to intervene if I think, you know, what you're wearing is provocative or whatever. But that whole, and he has guidelines for, you know, you can start doing this around age 11, 12. I think for parents who might be thinking, yeah, I'd like to let my kid have a little more responsibility, but I haven't a clue how to do that. This is really a guideline for that I think is really helpful. And he makes a point. I mean, just to read one quote from the book. He says, for adolescents to be ready for life after high school, they need at least some period of time exercising their own judgment in all aspects of their life while they are at home with their parents. So they need to experiment with that where the guardrails are still on, because parents aren't going to follow their kids to college and the guardrails come off then.
Yeah, and what a great place to fail in when you're at home versus when you're at
Right,
college. Working with a
right.
lot of college freshmen, there's a bunch of things they struggle with, but three that come to mind is when they do have to cook, That's so hard. Like I was talking to a young man the other day and he's like, I think there's something wrong with his hamburger. It was frozen and he put it on the pan. And I was like, I think we need some new hamburger. But so that's cooking, laundry, just they can't figure it out. So starting that whenever in high school, but figuring that out. And then what we've seen recently is they really struggle with stamina because they're not used to doing things like laundry or cooking. So they pour all this mental energy into it. And then they feel like they have no space to take care of self-care and study and cook. And
Mm,
their life gets really small and they start to get overwhelmed. So, like, letting them fail with cooking, cleaning, whatever that is around the house, getting back on time. Like, if they miss curfew, they miss curfew, right? They should have those consequences. But what a great
right. Which I think is another sort of general piece of advice is allow for natural consequences so kids can learn from their mistakes. Now, obviously, within again
practice.
reasonable, and there's another great book, The Self-Driven Child. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they make that point that you lay out the options for kids. I mean, certainly safety, health, those kinds of things are sort of off limits for letting kids make up their own mind. But if a kid is debating whether to do option A or option B, you lay out, so what are the pluses for option A? What are the minuses? Same for B. And then my favorite chapter in that book is called It's Your Call. Now you lay them all out and then say it's your call, which is probably one of the hardest things, any parent, could ever do. But that's how you learn from mistakes. If we totally take away the opportunity to make mistakes, then how are kids ever going to learn? So
And all this, I want to tie it back into these are what develop executive function skills, especially with people with ADHD. It's safe failure learning. And that's how we learn how to reach our goals, right? And so
ooh, I got to write that down.
I, I,
People keep
I
asking me, is it okay for kids to experience failure? And I say, well, failure does come with a whole set of side effects, which no parent wants, but I like the safe failure. That's a really good expression for that.
well, thank you. This gets into building confidence. So I have two more quick questions for you. But one is the most common question I get from parents is how can I help my kid build confidence? Or how do I raise a confident child? How would you respond to that?
So, one is giving them the opportunity to solve problems rather than jumping in with a solution, because that's what we tend to do without even thinking. We know the perfect answer for that. You have to indulge me for a minute because there was an article from The Atlantic a couple months ago, which talked about making a case for the lighthouse parent, it was an expression they introduced where they say a lighthouse parent stands as a steady, reliable guide, providing safety and clarity without controlling every aspect of their child's journey. And contrast that with helicopter parents or snowplow parents, right? But they
Right.
give this one example, which I could identify with, and I think we all could. A child comes home feeling overwhelmed by school and frustrated that she's doing all of the work for a big group project that is due next week. The overfunctioning parent is ready with an array of next steps. Why don't you assign the other group members what they each have to do? You should put your name next to all the parts you did so the teacher gives you credit. I'm going to email the teacher so she knows you're doing all the work. And they say, that inadvertently communicates to the child what's needed is parental involvement. Sometimes what a child needs is simply to be acknowledged. Wow, that sounds like a lot. I can tell you're working really hard. Do you have any ideas about what you want to do? We just don't think about that I mean, those should be the first things we think of, and holding back from giving kids solutions as much as possible.
You're dead on. It's so hard. And as an adult with ADHD, looking back at my real life, looking back at my life, the only time I developed real confidence was when I failed and I had to figure it out. And I knew I had that safety net, right? I knew I had people around me who loved me and cared about me, but I had to figure it out. And I wish there was another way to develop real confidence, not this fake confidence, right? But
Right.
just doing hard things on repeat and struggling through it. And I wish there was a better way. I just don't know one.
No, I don't think there is. In fact, I love that. I mean, heard teachers say this to kids, and I've suggested to teachers all, I can do hard things. Just making that the mantra, I can do hard things. Another piece of advice was some woman in France was writing about her parenting style, which raised a lot of interest. Came out in a magazine article a couple of years ago, but she said, I never do for my kids anything they could do for themselves. So that, you see a kid sitting on the couch, Mom, can you bring me a snack? No, that's something they could do for themselves. And it will change the way you parent if you think, well, I can do that, but could they do that? If they could, then they should. And also, I think the other thing is that as parents, we just naturally think we want our kids to be happy. And that's sort of the first line that we're always falling back on. I'm thinking, can we replace the word happy with resilient? I want my kid to be resilient because that's going to change the way you respond in a given moment.
That's awesome. And obviously I have these conversations. I think about this stuff a lot and I still struggle with it. Like I'll watch, I have a 6-year-old and I'll watch her not now, but a few years ago, like struggling to like zip up her coat. And just every bone in my body wants to jump in. And I just have like, because you love these children too much
Yeah,
to let them figure it
yeah,
out. I mess up sometimes and I still have these conversations all the time. So
yeah.
there's a lot of grace out there to parents as well. Like,
Yeah, part of the issue there is it's a moving target. I mean, when you want to jump in it for the 2-year-old, you don't do that same jumping in when they're 3, but you don't know where the limit. I remember my younger son lives in Japan, and his son started at an international school when he was 2.5. And here are a couple of, I mean, there are cultural differences here. I mean, here's one. The school told Isaac and his wife, okay, it's okay for you to bring Kenshi to school for the first day, but after that, he needs to take the school bus. A
interesting.
2.5-year-old. I mean, it was a little school bus just for that school, but nonetheless. Isaac said when they went in for their first parent-teacher conference in November, Kenshi had just turned 3. And the teachers were giving them feedback, and they said, Kenshi's really good at dressing himself. And my son looked at his wife, and they both said, wait, Kenshi can dress himself? I didn't
Yeah.
even know that because they were continuing to dress him. So that's what I mean about it's a moving target, which again makes it hard. When do you jump in?
It,
Yeah.
it's so hard. And a lot of the people who complain about these kids aren't developing executive function skills, I think we forget sometimes we created this, right? Like we're the ones who need to pull back.
Yeah, yeah. Years ago, I did a workshop for a private school in LA, which is right next. The parents of that school, many of them worked in the entertainment industry, so it was a pretty elite kind of school. And I remember after the first year, they said, "Oh, you need to come back and talk to our parents. They really need to hear this message." So they brought me back a year later, and one of the parents picked me up at my hotel and brought me to the school. And she said, well, you'll see when you get there because we're doing this fundraiser for the school. And the fundraiser was like a carnival. I mean, it was like all different games that kids could play where they'd pay for the game. I mean, it was the most elaborate thing, very professional signs as we drove into the parking lot. And I thought, oh my God, these parents have amazing executive skills. And that's how I started my keynote. I said, I can see you all have amazing executive skills. Here's what I'm afraid of. You're using your executive skills, and that's preventing your kids from developing theirs. And, it was somewhat of a risk, but the first question I got after I finished my keynote is, wait, how can we do that?
That's the whole speech right there, right? And
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But you're right. I mean, it's instinctive, and then it becomes habit. And then how do you break all that?
and you see someone else doing it and it's just like should I be tying my daughter's because the other parent on the playground's doing it? And so
Right.
that's why I was weaving the empathy for the parents is because I'm in the middle of it right now. And I used to think very differently. I knew everything about parenting until I had a daughter. I was like the best parent in the world until I had to do it. And
Yeah.
so now I weave in that empathy, but we still need to let them struggle through hard things. And that's how we develop confidence.
Yeah.
Here's my closing question for you. Going back to the article, there was a lot of pros and a lot of cons about executive function coaching. Obviously, I've dedicated a large part of my professional career to this. What do you think about executive function coaches? I know it's a broad question, but what do you think?
I'm in favor of them. I mean, I think, again, I train coaches. So, but there's good executive function coaching and there's poor executive function coaching. And too often, it's the same thing with those parents. It's executive function coaches using their executive skills to get a kid through a class or through a semester or through a year. And it really takes a little more effort to pull back and say, okay, I can break this project down into multiple steps and he can finish each step by the deadline. But it's another thing to say, okay, what are your thoughts about making a plan for doing this long-term project? And so it's too easy for coaches, unless, again, they have to do that same sort of deliberate thinking. Is this going to help the kid or is it going to hold them back in terms of gradually giving the kid more control and helping the kid develop the skills of time management, planning, et cetera, without having that done for them? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I'm probably the most biased person in the world on the subject, but I've seen the number of lives that our organization and many others have changed. And you hit the nail on the head earlier when it was sink or swim. We just lost a lot of these kids. A lot of our best and brightest, we just lost. And due to many different avenues, whether it was not believing in themselves, substance abuse, or maybe just underemployed, right? And so I think, as you and I've talked about many times, these are just skills. So we're teaching the skills. And you are exactly right that we often want to jump in too much, especially when a kid is really struggling. But what I worry about more than anything is the people I know with ADHD or dyslexia or whoever who haven't made it or haven't lived up to what they wanted to, what their goals were. It's because they didn't have these skills. It is very common for a high schooler to tell me they never need to use Google Calendar, and I show them how to use it anyways. And then when they're independent, they have that skill. Whether they're resisting me or not, they at least have it. And that's what I get worried about. And that's why I'm so in favor of it, is because we're just giving the kids the skills for when they want to use them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really good way of thinking about it too. Yeah. And I think good teachers do that as well. They say, so here's a way to study for a test, or here's a way to keep your notebook organized, or whatever, knowing that they can't control whether their kids study for the test that way or keep their notebooks organized that way. But at least they've been shown a process, and it's there for them to tap into when they recognize they need to do something differently.
Yeah, that lighthouse, I really like that metaphor for that.
Yeah.
Just you're showing them the way. It's their job to go if they want, but
They can bang up against the rocks if they want
make
to.
this as hard or as easy as they want to. But at least they, when they're ready, they can do it, which is what I care about. Like when we
Yeah.
talk about advocating, most of our kids don't know how to talk to their teacher in a clear, kind, and respectful way. It often comes off as entitled, and so giving them those skills, they'll use it when the time is right, but they just don't have those skills. They don't know how
Yeah.
systems and reminders and calendars and
Yeah.
things like that. And so
Yeah.
that that's why I'm passionate about it.
Yeah, yeah. The other piece that executive skills coaching does, and what you just said now made me think of this, is it gives kids a genuine relationship. Coaching starts with a relationship. And when that relationship is established, then the coach can point out things to the kid, which, a teacher might not be able to, a parent won't be able to. And so they're much more of an unbiased observer. And kids need those relationships too.
I've had some amazing mentors in my life, and every person I've talked to who's felt fulfilled by their life, their career, whatever, they all mention these mentors, these coaches, whoever. And so it's just such a key component because we miss so many things, especially when with my ADHD, I move really fast. And so I miss a lot of the things. And I struggled with that metacognition, that self-reflection. And a coach really helped me with that.
Yeah, yeah.
When does the revised version of Smart but Scattered come out?
It's already out. Yeah, it just came out. So you can get it at Amazon, or actually if you go to my website, there's a discount code there. So smartbutscatteredkids.com. You can get it through my publisher at a 20% discount.
Awesome. I could not recommend that higher. I know ours copy is worn out in the center. That's why I ask.
Yeah. And one of the changes we made, well, a couple of things is we added, because we felt like we were throwing so much information at people. For each executive skill, we have a section in that chapter on where to start, because sometimes you don't know where to start. But the other thing is we really have, more so than the last time, we've emphasized this is a collaborative relationship. This is not a top-down parent telling kid what to do. This is a way to help kids think about what they need to do and think about the solutions, think about the strategies, et cetera. It's starting from a very young age. I mean, there are age appropriate things you can do with 3-year-olds. So,
Awesome. I know it's our North Star here. So thank you so much for all you do. Yeah. Thank you so much for being a great mentor to me. And thank you so much for all you've done for our community. So
yeah, sure. This is a good conversation. Thanks.
thank you for joining us on the Executive Function for All podcast. If today's episode brought you any value, please rate us 5 stars and share it with someone who may benefit. And remember, every small step you take builds towards your success. For resources and guidance, visit untappedlearning.com. Keep growing, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.